Only mode.
Hello, my name is Jeff Farbman from the Wallace Center at Winrock International. Welcome to our webinar on the Food Hub Development Program grant. We hope we're able to clarify the process of this grant in this webinar. We will have plenty of time for questions, so let me give you a quick technical introduction to the software so you know how to ask those questions. Next slide, please. And the next. Your webinar screen will look like this, the slide presentation on the left, next, and the control panel on the right, next. Note that the software next sometimes collapses the control panel to make it take up less of your screen. If that happens, just hit the little orange arrow, look on the extreme right side of your screen to find the collapsed control panel. Next, we suggest that you keep this visible so you can see any written answers to questions and submit questions of your own in your control panel. Select the View menu and deselect next the Auto Hide control panel in the View menu to prevent the panel from collapsing again. Over in the control panel is the questions box. You're muted during the presentation, so please use the question box to type in your questions for our presenters. We will be asking as many questions of the presenters as possible, but please get in your questions whenever they occur to you so we can make sure we get to them. We are going to archive this webinar on the ngfn.org website as well as on the project website on wallacecenter.org. And you'll find our other webinars there. Okay, next, please. So let me jump right in and introduce Dr. John Fisk, Director of the Wallace Center, and Devana Sherwood, Program Officer for this project. John, will you give us a brief introduction of the Wallace Center, to the Wallace Center?
Sure, I'd be glad to. It's great to be with you all, and it's really great to be able to present this opportunity for food hubs across the country. We're really excited about it, and we're also excited that over time more and more resources are being made available for regional food systems, food hubs, and other enterprises. So it's great to be here with you. If I could get the next slide. My little notes on the Wallace Center. For those of you that don't know us, we're a nonprofit organization serving the growing community of civic, business, and philanthropic organizations around the good food system. We work across all those sectors. At the bottom of it, we're really committed to creating a more sustainable and equitable food and agricultural system. We do that any way we strategically can, honestly. So primarily we advance regional collaborative efforts to move good food, healthy, green, fair, and affordable food into more scaled-up markets. And we do that because we think that way more producers can benefit, more communities can have viable economies stemming from the food system, and a greater number of acres can be managed sustainably. So by scaling up, we can have greater impact. Our focus is primarily around market-based solutions, right? Using that lever of change in the marketplace, of which the food system is primarily, so that we can link more people and more diverse communities to good food, and we can have that impact that we're after. And we also pay attention to increasing opportunity for historically underserved populations, both urban and rural areas, as a key piece of our work. So with that, let me turn it over to Devana, who's going to take you through, who's leading this program, is going to take you through the particulars of the grant program, and I will be back with you at the end of the call around the Q&A.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Devana Sherwood. I am a program officer with the Wallace Center, and I am the program manager for this project, which is strengthening small-scale sustainable farming and local food systems through accelerating food hub development. So this is a very major component of our project, the Food Hub Development Grants. The program objective is to build food hubs' capacity to overcome current challenges and position them for long-term success. The top 5 intended outcomes we have of the program are increasing small and mid-scale producer capacity and greater access to direct, intermediate, institutional, and retail markets, increased food hub financial viability and operating efficiency, increased adoption of sustainable farming practices, increased access to fresh, healthy food in target communities, and increase knowledge of successful Food Hub strategies, challenges, and best practices. So talking a little bit about the funding details, I'm on the next slide. Grants range between $10,000 and $75,000 for projects to be completed within 12 months. The Wallace Center intends to award between 15 to 30 grants in total. The grants are available to both nonprofit and for-profit food hubs. Only one application per organization will be allowed. If you're not sure if your organization fits within our definition of a food hub, please visit Are You a Food Hub on the NGFN Food Hub resource page for more information. This program is funded through the Walmart Foundation. Okay, so what exactly is a food hub? A food hub is a business or an organization that is actively managing the aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source-identified food products, primarily from local and regional producers, to strengthen their ability to satisfy wholesale, retail, and institutional demand. So if you want to know if you are a hub qualified for this funding, you can visit our survey at the link here below, www.surveymonkey. The link is on the site, and we will also put it on the web page. It'll take you through a series of questions that'll help you and us determine your eligibility. So eligible food hubs have been established and operating for 2 or more years. That's going to be very key. I know we're getting a lot of questions regarding eligibility, so I'm going to repeat it. The food hub must already be established and operating for 2 or more years. You must be sourcing from multiple suppliers, and you can justify how funding will allow them to overcome specific obstacles and strengthen the local food system. Eligible food hubs will demonstrate that they are working with a diverse group of small farms, including farms at various levels of sustainable production. Eligible food hubs will demonstrate that they have or are developing strategies to increase gender and ethnic diversity in their suppliers, the farmers they're sourcing from. Eligible food hubs are willing to measure and report on metrics that help us evaluate grant-making strategies. So preference will be given to hubs that work with farmers emphasizing sustainable production practices. However, working with producers utilizing sustainable practices is not a requirement for eligibility, but preference will be given there. So our timeline. Our anticipated timeline is that we released the RFA, I think it was February 24th, last week. Applications are due March 30th by 5 p.m. We will have a panel that will review all of the applications, and the grantees will be selected in mid-April. And initial grant funds, they will be awarded and contracted, and initial funds will be dispersed likely late April. The application due date is March 30th, 2014 by 5 p.m. Eastern Time. They must be submitted by that time and emailed to foodhubdev@winrock.org. The application review criteria. So the strongest applicants will demonstrate an understanding of and a commitment to the goals and objectives of the project, a clear vision of how to overcome barriers limiting growth and economic viability for food hubs and the food hub and the farms from which they source. They will demonstrate practical strategies to develop market opportunities for farmers and strengthen their regional food supply. the strongest applicants will demonstrate a desire to promote gender and ethnic diversity in the farms from which they source. They will have proven and continuing support of sustainable growing practices and plans for continued success and impact in the community. A willingness to share knowledge and learning with other grantees and beyond, and a willingness to share data and participate in the second Food Hub benchmark study. There are 5 parts to the application. There's the cover page, and we have provided that in a Word document on our website, which is at the bottom of this slide. Section 1, the application narrative. Section 2, the cost application, which we've provided the template for that in Excel on the web page. Section 3 is the required documentation. And Section 4 is the appendix with supplementary information. So, Section 1, the application narrative. It needs to consist of a statement of purpose and justification of need, the approach and the business model, the objectives, activities, and the impacts expected, organizational capacity and management experience, collaboration approach and collaborators, and how you will capture knowledge and serve as a model. We have some formatting requirements. We ask that the applications do not exceed 5 pages, single-spaced lines in Times New Roman 12-point font. Please use 1-inch margins for all size as a minimum. The page limits do include tables, charts, and graphics as well. Section 2, the cost application. A detailed budget is required with the template that we have provided, as well as budget narrative, discussing the salaries, the fringe benefits, travel costs, consultant services, any subawards or contractual, any equipment, other direct costs, and any matching funds or in-kind. Again, the template is available on the program website. Please remember that the grants cannot exceed $75,000, and they are 12 months in length. Section 3, required documentation. We ask for a letter of commitment from the applicant organization, letters of support. The letters of support are only required if a portion of the work will be done by a subcontractor, a collaborator, or another outside source. And then the proof of legal business organizational status. Section 4 is an optional appendix. It includes up to 2 additional materials that you think would be helpful to us, a business plan, market analysis, or organizational chart, for example. This slide will show you the contact information, our program website, our email, and telephone number, as well as the mailing address. We ask that the applications all be emailed in, but if you don't have access to email, reliable email, we will make exceptions in those cases, and they can be mailed in. You should call us in that instance. So we're very excited for your questions. We know there are many. We have been getting many so far, and I think John is going to field the questions.
It's true. I get to be master of ceremonies. Give me just a second here. Okay. First question is, who will review the applications, and will applications be treated as confidential documents, particularly as they present performance and financial metrics?
Yes, they will absolutely be confidential documents, and we are pulling together a team of 10 or so professionals in the field, very well-respected professionals, to serve on our review committee.
Right, and they will sign a confidentiality agreement as well.
Yes, thank you.
Next one, do your grants allow for purchase/construction of structure or for a distribution center?
Construction is allowable, and so we just ask that the argument be made in your application for justification of how this meets the program's intended goals.
Right. Next one. What is the someone's asking about the how rigid are we on the establishment, operating, and counting towards the 2 years or more of eligibility. So they're asking how strict is that 2-year time frame.
So the purpose here is that this grant program is not meant for emerging hubs, not that haven't started out and aren't already operating. So it's fairly rigid. I mean, if it were just underneath of 2 years by days, as well, that could be something that we could consider. But really, we're looking for hubs that are already operating and already sourcing.
Right. That have gotten past some of that early indecision. What are we really doing here? Do we actually have any systems in place? So we're not looking to do startups, in part because the risks are higher at that point, and the goals of this program are really to expand things that are already happening, right? So it's not really about the time per se, it's really about the phase, but time is a good proxy. Yeah? Would you agree, Devon?
That's right. That's exactly right. And we just chose the 2 year as a metric that could show us that these folks are already operating.
Right. Okay. And then the next question is the same. I knew there were a number of those. There's actually the third one that's the same. Someone asks, are we able to speak with someone in person about this opportunity?
Well, I suppose so. I guess I'd like to understand what the question is. It would be nice if we could have the question so that we could put it out there for everyone to benefit from.
Yeah. I think the bottom line is we're expecting a lot of response to this RFP, and so we're not going to be able to afford to spend the time on the phone working through details of anyone's particular proposal, and it's often not, then it's not fair if we give feedback to one group around there and help them with design and things like that we can't give to others. So we can respond to basic questions: what's eligible, what's considered, these kind of things. But when it gets into the more design aspects, or is this a good fit in any extent, we're not going to be able to respond to that.
And we will share the questions that are being asked and given responses to on the web page under the FAQs for this grant opportunity, so that everybody can benefit from the questions and the responses.
Yeah, excellent point. Next question, will funding be allocated in full at the beginning of the grant period, or will it be allotted throughout the life of the program?
It's most likely that it will be allotted throughout the life of the project.
Right. Is this targeted at agriculture only, or could a sustainable seafood hub also apply?
Seafood is food.
Seafood is food.
And I think that a seafood hub would be eligible.
Right. And we actually, before the call, we talked about meat as well, right? So do you want to respond about meat as well?
Yes, livestock, seafood, and fruit and vegetables, they're all eligible.
Right. What is the second food hub benchmark study? You want me to take that one?
Yeah, that'd be great. I think you were going to.
Okay. So in industry, this thing called benchmarking is common practice, right? So what it does is it says it allows you to get a sense of what are common levels of, say, business efficiencies or costs for things, or operating structures and costs and things like that. So it's designed to get a baseline that says in the industry it's common, in this case, in the industry it's common for food hubs to have this much square footage of X, Y, and Z, and it costs them this much per square foot, and their revenues generated per square foot are this much. So it allows people to understand how well is a hub operating, or is a retail store operating, or is a factory operating? Like I said, it's common in the industries. And it's oftentimes used for when you're going to look for capital or a loan, either a loan or equity or debt capital. They use it to kind of compare you to others in the industry. So as this thing grows, we feel it's important that we start getting a baseline. Right? Even though there's a diversity of models out there, these are still businesses that are increasingly looking for capital. And so having that baseline does one thing. It sends a signal to lenders that yes, it's an established industry and here's some guidelines for you, but it also sends a signal back to the hub saying, here's what others are doing in terms of efficiencies. Maybe you're doing really well in this, or maybe you could do better in this. So it gives them a management tool. And so we ran the first benchmarking study in cooperation with Farm Credit East, which is one of the farm credit banks in the Northeast. And now we're going to run a second one because the food hub sector, if you will, is changing rapidly. And doing a benchmarking study like this over time allows for more accurate information. So maybe I'll stop there. Next question. Can an entity apply on behalf of a group of multiple hubs to create a cohesive statewide system and apply for a large grant to disperse to them, or should each hub apply separately with a portion of their funds going to the entity to create a cohesive statewide system?
So we do have a cap of $75,000, and if that group wanted to apply within that cap of $75,000, that would be welcome. If that $75,000 does not meet their needs as a group, they could apply individually. However, this grant opportunity is available for the entire United States. So we're not anticipating that we will make a large number of the grants in one geographic area.
Right. I think that gives good guidance there. In the RFA, Section E, Collaboration Approach and Collaborators, it's listed on page 8 but not listed on page 12. Should we include it in our narrative or not? That's a little technical. Have you found where they're asking, Devana?
So I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? Collaboration approach?
Yeah, in Section E, called the Collaboration Approach and Collaborators. It's listed on page 8, it says, but not listed on page 12. So there's a disparity, I think, between our application guide and our RFA is what it's pointing out.
Okay, so yeah, I'm just pulling up the RFA as we're talking about it. I'm seeing on page 9 that the collaboration approach and collaborators is Section E on the overview, like the table of contents, and then they're saying it's missing within the document
listed.
itself?
Yeah, it's not listed on page 12, which I think gets into our form, doesn't it? Our template?
Yes, so I'm sorry, you'll just have to give me a moment while I'm pulling through the form.
I'll find the next question here.
Yeah, thank you.
Shall I ask you the next question, or do you want to keep looking at that?
Yeah, no, I'm seeing on the form that we've got E as capturing knowledge and serving as a model. So we want to understand the collaboration approach and the collaborators. So I see that that is missing, and I'm sorry about that on the template itself, but that is a section that we did want to know about. So I think what we can do is go back to the RFA itself online and update that with a little bit more information.
Right, and let's mark on the website that there's been an update when people look.
Yeah, yep, so I'm seeing on page, well, it says 12, that we'll have to add that section in under E, and then F will be capture knowledge and serving as a model. We do want to understand the Food Hub's collaboration approach and any collaborators they are working with. So that is an important section, and we'll have to add that in and give a couple bullets of explanation. Apologies for missing that, and thank you for pointing it out.
Is this grant only for previously registered food hubs, or is it for organizations that fit the criteria in the SurveyMonkey but have not registered as a food hub, or both?
It is not constrained to ones that are already registered. We highly recommend that folks jump on there and register themselves and go through and do that survey. If you are eligible, you are eligible.
Right.
So if you meet the eligibility criteria, you're eligible.
Yeah, but we are saying that eventually you're going to have to take the survey and get on the food hub list before we make a grant to you.
Yep, so we highly encourage you to do it at this stage.
Yeah, you might as well do it now because you might have to do it later. It's a short survey, it takes about 10 minutes, and then you end up on the National Food Hub list and probably eventually on USDA's Food Hub list, although they're going to have perhaps a separate process. And I think that's an asset to you. Who do you consider a small and mid-sized producer?
Shall I name them? No, I'm just kidding. You know, that is, I'm not sure that we have a straightforward definition. Are we using USDA's? Or can we remain flexible a little bit there?
I think we're flexible, but I think people generally use USDA's. What, under $250,000 is a small, under $500,000 is a large, I believe. Those are definitely broad strokes. You know, I think characterizing your small and mid-sized farmers in the proposal briefly would be advantageous.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Has Wallace Center set preferred target communities, or is that something that we define in our own applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. We feel like our target communities are communities that have limited access to fresh food. So we can leave that up to you guys to define under those parameters.
Right. Are there regional areas that are preferable?
Not in my mind.
No, not in our mind either. Not in the mind of my mind, but not in the mind of the RFA if it has one.
Yeah.
Will you fund a vertically integrated operations? For example, if our organization has a farm that supplies food to our food hub, can we apply for funding for the farm operations or improvements?
So that's a great question. We anticipate another round of granting coming up later in the fall. And so this round of granting is really dedicated to the food hub. And the fall granting will be for the farm level, but running through the food hubs. So
that may be more appropriate for this for them.
Yep, and we would recommend that you look for that in coming out probably in early fall, and it's a farm development grant process.
Right. Will proposal reviewers take matching funds into consideration when scoring proposals?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure, sorry. Will proposal reviewers take matching funds into consideration when scoring proposals?
It will certainly be taken into consideration, and especially with capital expenditure, so large purchases.
Mm-hmm. But it won't be part of our scoring per se, but it'll be in terms of final decisions, it'll be taken into consideration.
That's right.
Yeah. Can the grant be used to help buy a building?
I would say that if it is meeting the goals and objective, it is incumbent upon the applicant to explain in their application and justify how that expenditure is going to meet the goals and objectives of this program.
Right. I think that's well said. Keeping in mind that you're competing with other proposals that may be asking for something else. And so if indeed you can write a competitive proposal, that follows along what Devana just said, then the answer is yes. What about a feasibility and planning grant for an established food hub looking to expand?
So the goals, I'm going to repeat just for fun, the goals and the expected outcomes that we see for this project. The goals of this project are to increase the success of small and mid-scale sustainable farm businesses throughout the U.S. And, you know, we're putting somewhat of an emphasis on farmers of color and female farmers. And we want to strengthen and accelerate local food systems and food hub development. And the expected outcomes, the top 5 outcomes that we expect are, 1, to increase small and mid-scale producer capacity and access to direct, intermediate, institutional, and retail markets. 2, increased food hub viability. 3, increased awareness and knowledge about food hubs and regional infrastructure opportunities, challenges, and best practices nationwide. 4, increased access to fresh, healthy food in those target communities. And 5, increased adoption of sustainable farming practices. So these are our goals, these are our objectives, these are the outcomes we want. If the application succeeds in accomplishing these outcomes and these goals and objectives, then it is competitive.
Good, thank you. Moving on, what is an acceptable proof of legal business/organizational status?
I don't know, John. Do you?
Yeah, sure. You've got to have your NGO papers. For example, if you're an NGO, your legal status papers, and if you're a business, you've got to have your legal status papers that you're an LLC or a private partnership, that kind of thing. You know, so those kind of things that shows that you legally exist. We can't give you money if you don't legally exist.
There was one question about a hub who is changing in name and reincorporating, and there was some concern about the 2-year operation and, you know, basically the same entity, but it will look on paper to be a different entity. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think just explain that and provide whatever legal documentation you have. If it's the old one, into transition to the new one, or if it's the new one, and that kind of thing. And
especially, you know, the operations. If the operations have been and remain similar, meaning they're sourcing from this X group of farmers that they have been sourcing from, they are serving X group of markets that they have been serving, you know, that sort of thing, that helps to really prove that, yes, they have been operating. This is just a name change.
Great. Next question may take Jeff's help as well. What is the benchmarking participation requirement? So one way to answer that is, I guess it's the requirement. I was thinking, what's the criteria?
What we envisioned was that people were, that the grantees that we will grant to, mm-hmm. we would like them, and we will require them to participate in the benchmarking. However, it is a confidential process, and so it would be a gentleman's agreement that they're agreeing to do that. And Jeff, did you want to elaborate on that, or John?
Sure. Being part of the benchmarking requires an answer to about a 20-question survey and sharing a couple of financial documents, profit and loss statement. Let me get back to you with the list in a moment, but you know, it's detailed financial documentation that you're sharing, but let me underscore that it is an very confidential process. You are sharing information with a banking institution who is used to dealing with confidentiality. So it is deep and detailed information. We expect that it'll take you about 2 or 3 hours to answer the survey and get all the required documentation. But it's nothing that you shouldn't be keeping records of for tax filing purposes and whatnot anyway.
Right. And the benefit is you get a personalized report about your food hub and how it relates to the others that are in the benchmarking study. So actually you get excellent feedback from an institution that does this kind of thing. And the other hand is you're contributing to this effort nationwide. You're being part of a study that's going to inform the whole sector, which is terrific. And we're encouraging people or food hubs to participate in the benchmarking study, whether they get a grant, whether they apply for the grant or not. We're looking to increase that sample size significantly so that the results are solid. Mm-hmm. The requirement around this, though, is that if you're going to get a grant from us, we want you to participate in the benchmarking study.
Right, and participating, not only do you get this personalized comparison of your hub's financial and operational facility as compared to the average with the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile, but you're by participating, you're educating not only your fellow hubs, but lenders and investors on what food hubs are and how they are solid businesses. Lenders, investors are often conservative, and knowledge is power. So our thought here is that we will be opening up additional funding to hubs across the country. The list of required documents are the end of December 2013 and end of December 2012 balance sheets, your 2013 profit and loss statement with detail, and your 2013 statement of cash flow.
And I should expand on that and mention that this is round one of our Food Hub Development Grants. And in the fall, we will do round two of another round of granting, in addition to the Farm Production Assistance Grants, the Sustainable Farm Production Assistance Grants that I mentioned earlier, which will also be released in the fall.
Great. Thank you both. Next question. Can the grant be used to expand an existing hub to a new location in the same region?
I'm going to repeat myself, if it gets us to the goals and objectives, they just have to make the argument for that.
Right.
A competitive, good justification and argument for how it will help us achieve those goals and objectives.
Right. And that expansion has been well thought out and fits within the business plan and that kind of a thing. Next one about reviewing. What weight will be given to long-term financial sustainability within the application process? And then the second part, will a nonprofit operation with additional expenses be at a disadvantage to a for-profit hub?
No, a nonprofit will not be at a disadvantage to a for-profit hub. Financial viability goes for nonprofits as well as for-profits. For the scoring, I'll have to pull that section up, so just give me a second.
Yeah. I mean, there's good examples of nonprofits out there that are operating as hubs that have been financially stable, right, or sustainable for a long time. If you look at their books, they may not be profitable, right, but they're sustainable because they have a revenue portion of their work, and then they have a grant portion of their work. So you just need to kind of present it in a way that your food hub activity, your core, the way we look at it here is your core activity around aggregation, distribution, and marketing is being covered by your revenue, and that your activities outside of that are more educational, that are more training, that are more civic, are more covered by your grants.
And the scoring is 10 points.
Right,
so plans for achieving economic viability of the food hub and continuity of impact is 10 points out of 100.
Great, thank you. Is working capital or even cash reserves an eligible budget expense line item?
So we feel like that's really the arena for loans, and that's not something to be covered in this grant.
Right. So we don't want to see working capital and cash reserves as a line item in your budget.
Correct.
Yep. There's a technical one. Does the 5 pages mean the entire grant with support letters and other materials?
No, I thought that was explained fairly well in the RFA, but I can pull that back up.
Right.
The other support information is not a part of that 5 pages.
All right, so it's just the narrative. That's the 5 pages, and then your budget narrative, and your other support documents are in addition to that, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And it says it pretty well in the PowerPoint as well, which we will make available to everybody. But so section 1 is the application narrative, and that's the statement of purpose, the justification of need, the approach and the business model, the objectives, activities and impacts, the organizational capacity, management experience, the collaboration approach and collaborators, and the capturing knowledge and serving as a model. That's the 5 pages. Section 2 is the cost application. There's no page limit. That's the budget and the budget narrative. Section 3 is the required documentation, and there's no page limit. And that's separate from section 1. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm going to keep going. Are matching funds required to be secured prior to approval? As a for-profit organization, we can only promise to commit future gross profits as matching funds. I mean, there's no hard and fast rule on this. I think different grant makers do it differently. Devonna, did you have a insight into this?
I don't. I think that could be acceptable as long as we could see that there was previous profit or expected profit for the year that we're granting. So as long as that is a reasonable expectation that profit was made in the last year or profit is expected to be made because of different reasons in the current year of the grant, that would be an acceptable match.
Right. And I think I know the question doesn't ask this, but in terms of other grant dollars that you might be applying for and trying to leverage with this, I would say that you don't need to have them secured at the time of application, but if once we get to the grant making, we get close to that, we're going to need some indication as to how realistic it is that you will be able to secure those additional ones before we make the grant. So if you're going to put it in there, you want to have a pretty good sense that it's doable, that it's coming, or the high probability that it's coming. Because oftentimes in grant programs, you can say we promise to raise the funds over the course of the grant, but the course of this grant is only 1 year, which is not very long. And so that strategy doesn't really jive with this. So having a very high probability of the funds you want to leverage is your best bet, or matching future profits or existing cash. Okay. Next one, kind of long. We applied for a USDA value-added producer grant to be awarded at the same time as your grant. I think this is going in the same place. Is the Wallace Center interested in meeting needs not met by other grants? For instance, purchasing a truck or refrigeration unit for distribution not allowed in the USDA grants.
Well, I think I'll answer that question by just saying again, as long as it's meeting the goals and objectives, that's the argument to be made.
Right. I think what isn't attractive is perhaps framing it as, oh, we couldn't get the money somewhere else, so can you guys make up the difference? That's not really an attractive pitch.
That's right.
So you want to kind of make sure your application describes it in the way that we've asked it for, that it creates the picture and the justification and the sustainability and the addressing the bottleneck in the system.
Exactly.
Yeah. Will the benchmarking results be shared with participants? Excellent question.
Well, so Jeff, did you want to talk about that a little bit? The benchmarking, each group, each organization that puts forward and does the benchmarking study will get their own personalized information.
That's correct.
But the rest of the information is confidential and won't be shared by naming anybody, but will be aggregated and shared to the public.
Also correct. Perfect.
Right. So there'll be a report that comes out that aggregates the data, that doesn't name anybody, that lets you know where this sector's at in terms of those benchmarking. It's a financial benchmarking tool. Good question. Wow, it's a long one. Our food hub's been in existence for 3 years. We were primarily distributing a multi-farm CSA share and also in the same space distributing low-cost versions of the same to communities in need. I think that fits a lot of hubs across the country. We are now moving into a produce terminal to allow us to expand, and we'll work with a specific group of growers who are either certified organic or transitioning to certified organic. Given that we are changing our name, would we qualify as a hub? Is this the one you were getting at, Jeff?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so we've already answered this, that they're changing the name, they have a history. But this does bring up something else that I think I skipped over earlier. Someone asked about what do we mean by sustainable production practices. Devonna, you want to take a shot at that, and maybe I'll jump in?
I'd be happy to. So we anticipated this question. So sustainable, there's a lot of different definitions of sustainability, but what we're talking about here is that sustainable production practices strive for a healthy ecology to the farm system that builds soil through cover crops, compost, crop rotations, integrated pest management, organic agriculture, that reduce or don't use at all synthetic chemicals. So sustainable agriculture means an integrated system of plant and or animal production practices that will, over the long term, enhance environmental quality and the natural resource base upon which the agricultural economy depends. It'll make the most efficient use of non-renewable resources and on-farm resources and integrate, where appropriate, natural biological cycles and controls. It'll sustain the economic viability of farm operations as well and enhance the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. So there's going to be various different levels of sustainable production. This is a spectrum. And along this gradient, we will consider early on adopters and all the way to a very high level of sustainable farming. So it's a spectrum, and we'll be considering the entire people along the gradient.
Right. Well said. Next one's around eligibility, basically asking, does the applicant need to be a registered 501c3, or can it be an entity operating as a nonprofit and a food hub without being a legal entity? And if it wasn't a legal entity, would it need a fiscal agent? The basic answer is yes. You either need to be a legal entity, registered, or a business registered, or have a fiscal agent otherwise. Next question, Devon, is a good one. Are letters of support from farmers just attesting to the value/success of the food hub useful, or do you only want letters of support from farmers if they would be doing something new as a result of the grant? What's your advice there?
I think the former is useful and the latter is useful. So it could be both. But in the case that we asked for letters of support, we should clarify that we're only requiring letters of support if it pertains to a contractual relationship or sub-award or some sort of contractual relationship. So in the case that they mentioned with farmers, we're not requiring it.
Mm-hmm. Right, so only if a piece of your budget is contractually going to someone do we asking for those letters of support. But if you want to send it in your additional information area, your optional area is what she's saying, and you think it would be useful for your application, you can.
Exactly.
Right. This one looks related. Could letters of support include letters of recommendation from related organizations that support the success of the food hub?
So, yeah, I mean, I think the answer is the same, meaning sure. Yeah. We'd happily see that in your additional documentation, but what is required is just letters of support working with collaborators that have a contractual relationship under this grant.
Right. All right, let me find the next one here. Someone says, do you anticipate offering this grant again next year? Maybe you just want to reiterate what you said earlier.
Yeah, I happily will. So this is round 1, and round 2 will be held in the fall. So we will be releasing another round, another request for applications in the fall of this year, not next year.
Can the grantee use any portion of the funds as subgrants to its small farm/farmer suppliers for capacity building?
I would again say if it helps to achieve the goals and objectives, that's okay, but I would like to reiterate that we will release a request for applications for Sustainable Farm Production Assistance Grants in the fall as well, separately from round 2 of the Food Hub Development Grants. So there will be an opportunity to ask for farm production assistance grant.
Great. Someone asked, can they share this grant with other tribal fishermen that they would like to grow bigger? Now, I'm not sure if they mean share the RFP or share the money, so maybe think about that both ways, Devana. Can they share the grant with other tribal fishermen that would like to grow bigger?
So this grant is really for food hubs, and I'm having a hard time envisioning the sharing it with tribal fishermen, how that's a food hub.
Right. Well, okay.
This grant in particular is for the development of food hubs, and we have the eligibility criteria that must be a food hub that's already been operating for approximately 2 years. So I don't think I can answer that question, but to say that if they're not a food hub, they're not eligible.
Right.
If they are a food hub, then yes, they can collaborate.
Right, and they can propose that, and if it's competitive.
Can I jump in? Sorry. There have been a few people who have asked about if CSAs count as food hubs. The first answer I'd give was please fill out that questionnaire to describe your situation carefully. But generally, single farm CSAs are not food hubs. A core piece of being a food hub is aggregating from multiple producers and selling to multiple buyers. So even if you're basically a single farm CSA, but say get bread and honey from some neighboring value-added producers, or even aggregate some produce from others. But a full multi-farm CSA where there are several equal or somewhat equal suppliers and a large number of buyers, so in this case this would be a CSA, it would be consumers, that would be a food hub. It's a bit of a subtle line, but single farm CSAs are definitely not food hubs.
Great, well said. Thanks.
There you go. I know we just have a few minutes left, so I'm looking for questions that might be broadly applicable. Would a food hub that's diversity includes working with people with disabilities be of interest and help to meet the diversity objectives of this grant?
Well, we welcome it. The diversity objectives are primarily focused on women and farmers of color, so women farmers and farmers of color, but farmers that have disabilities, we would welcome that as well. So, I will emphasize again, everybody should be really paying very close attention to the program's goals and the expected outcomes, our top outcomes that we want to see. And that's what will make you competitive.
Right. Here's one that probably maybe fits in the gray area. Would a food bank that aggregates produce from local farms and distributes at no cost to people in need qualify as a food hub? And Jeff, we may need your input on this one because it doesn't really ask about qualify for the grant, although it is qualify for the grant if they're a food hub.
So I think this question is coming up because of the preclusion of donation. Do you think that's right?
You mean because, so I think, personally I think for our grant program, if they're not generating revenue from the product that they're distributing, then they're not going to be competitive. I think that's what you're
That's right. So the question is the food bank paying the food hub? So for example, in the RFA we say the program will not support projects that have direct food donations. This program will not fund direct food donation projects. Well, if the food bank is purchasing from the food hub, then that's a business transaction. That's just one of their markets, or maybe
in this case, the food bank is the food hub, but it's not selling its product. It may be buying its product, but it's not selling its food.
I see. So they have no other markets but their donation.
That doesn't tell me enough.
Right. Well, yeah, I would say if you're not actually selling the food, you're not a food hub. Sales is required.
Yeah.
If the question is, we've been doing sales, but we've only been doing that for 9 to 12 months, but we've been an aggregator and distributor of food as a food bank for many years, that's more of a question for Devana and you, John. Is it that you've been food hubbing for 2 years? I think probably the answer is yes, but that's a great question.
Yeah. It's an awesome project. You know what I mean? It's an awesome, what they're doing. If that's what they're doing, it's terrific. I'm not sure it fits with the program we're running here. Are you really looking for organizations that sell to wholesale and retail outlets as opposed to individual consumers? Jeff, maybe you want to address that one.
So I say it again.
Are you really looking for organizations that sell to wholesale and retail outlets as opposed to individual consumers?
No. Food Hub can certainly sell to consumers. I was talking about these multi-farm CSAs or box programs. There are hubs that are moving significant quantities of food in this way, and I would say intermediated to consumer model is a perfectly good food hub model, and depending upon the situation, can be an excellent choice for business model.
Yeah, I echo that. So, the outcomes that we're looking for are increased opportunities for small and mid-scale producers and increased access to markets. And if that achieves the increased access to markets, that's fantastic.
Excellent. We've reached our time limit here. Thanks for all your great questions. I suspect Jeff or Devana want to wrap this up with next steps.
Well, the next step is to put in your application. We're very excited to see all of the different applications we're going to get from across the country, and we thank everybody for their interest. Jeff, I'll leave it to you to wrap up if you'd like.
Sure. I just wanted to mention that we will have a second webinar, March 13th. I believe it's 2:30 p.m. Eastern. If there are questions that you'd come up with from between now and then, please join us a second time. Ashley, if you can get the email address up one last time so people make sure to thank you, mark it down, foodhubdev@winnock.org if there are questions that or remain unanswered and you need us to answer.
And we will post the recording of this as well as the questions and the answers that we've been receiving online for everybody to benefit from.
Right. Well, I think we'll do our best to get to the questions we didn't have a chance to ask because there are, quite a few here. I'm not sure. Will we be able to get to all of these folks on written, or just we'll do our best? Is that how we want to leave it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say so. There's a lot here. Again, thank you all, and I believe this is the end of the webinar, right, Jeff?
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.